This is the complete journey through the Fall of Jericho. But before the walls fell, before the priests marched with trumpets, there was silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of transition, of grief, of expectation, of a people holding their breath. Moses was dead, the prophet who split seas and shattered tablets, the voice that echoed commands from Mount Sinai, the shepherd who led them through plagues, deserts, rebellion, and fire. He had climbed to the top of Mount Nebo and never came down. His staff, once raised against Egypt's gods, now rested in the dust. His tent stood still. His voice, once thundered to Pharaoh, was quiet, and in that silence, God spoke. He did not speak to a prophet. He did not speak to a priest. He spoke to a soldier, to Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant who once lingered near Moses' tent, hungry for God's presence, the warrior who had seen the promised land with his own eyes and never doubted. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise. It was not just a command. It was a torch being passed. Arise, not to fill Moses' sandals, for no man could, but arise to lead. Arise to listen. Arise to walk in obedience. So Joshua stood before the people, not as Moses' shadow, but as God's chosen vessel. He looked across the plains toward the Jordan River. A swollen current blocked the way, and beyond it, rising like a sentinel, was Jericho. Its walls stretched high into the sky, thick as towers. Guards walked the ramparts, peering down into the valley. A city fortified by man and feared by nations. And yet, before any sword was lifted, before any horn was blown, the battle for Jericho began in the heart of one man. Would he fear? Or would he trust? For God had not called Joshua to perform miracles. He had called him to obey, and obedience was already becoming a weapon.
Now after the death of Moses the servant of the Lord, it came to pass, that the Lord spake unto Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan thou, and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them.
The morning came with mist over the valley. Joshua gave the command, and the camp stirred with motion. Children were gathered, scrolls were packed, tents were lowered, and at the center of the movement, 4 priests carried the Ark of the Covenant. It was no ordinary object, lined with gold, crowned with cherubim. It was the throne of God upon the earth, the holiest vessel in all of Israel. And they carried it toward the Jordan. The people followed, thousands upon thousands, moving in silence, not because they were ordered to, but because the presence of God walked before them. The river had swelled in the season of harvest. Its banks overflowed. The current was wild. To step into that river meant death. But the priests did not flinch. They reached the edge. The ark rested on their shoulders, and as their feet touched the water, it stopped. The current bowed. The waters rose up like walls, and dry ground appeared where none had stood before. The people gasped. Some wept. Others looked back, remembering stories their fathers had told of the Red Sea, of Pharaoh's army, of another day when God moved the waters for his people. But this was not the Red Sea. This was a new land, a new covenant, a new chapter. And God was leading them into it, not with force, but with faith. One by one, tribe by tribe, they crossed. children clutching mothers, elders leaning on staffs, warriors scanning the distant hills. Each step forward was a step out of wilderness. And when the last foot had crossed the riverbed, Joshua gave the order. 12 stones, one from each tribe. They were taken from the heart of the river, the place where God had held back the tide. They were stacked high as a monument, a reminder, so that future generations would ask, "What mean ye by these stones?" And they would answer, "This is where the Lord held back the Jordan for his people." Not just a crossing, a covenant. Not just a miracle, a memory written in stone.
And it came to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. And as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon an heap. And the people passed over right against Jericho.
Night had fallen. The stars scattered across the sky like embers from an unseen fire. The camp of Israel slept, the people exhausted from travel, hushed in anticipation. But Joshua remained awake. He had crossed the river. He had stacked the stones. And now he stood alone near Jericho. Its walls rose like mountains of man's pride, looming in the near distance. Torches burned atop its ramparts. Watchmen paced its heights. The city knew they were coming. Joshua's mind raced, with strategy, with uncertainty, with the burden of leadership. He stepped away from the camp into the dark quiet of the wilderness. He needed clarity. He needed God. And then he saw him. A figure stood in the shadows, motionless, cloaked in silence, but with authority radiating from his very stance. In his hand, a sword drawn, gleaming. Joshua approached, bold but wary. "Art thou for us or for our adversaries?" It was not just a question of war. It was the question of every leader's heart. The answer came like thunder wrapped in calm. "Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come, not for Israel, not for Jericho, but for the will of God." Joshua fell to the ground. The sandals that had tread through wilderness now pressed into holy ground. He removed them, not in ritual, but in reverence, for the unseen had become visible. The spiritual had stepped into the physical. He was not alone. This battle would not be won by sword, but by surrender. Not by might, nor by power, but by obedience to a commander unseen by the world, but known by those who bow. In that moment, Joshua was not a general. He was a servant. And Jericho was already trembling.
And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him, with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him, and said unto him, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries? And he said, Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place whereon thou standest is holy.
The next morning came not with swords, but with silence. Joshua returned from the encounter forever changed, and now he carried with him a command, strange, divine, and specific. God had spoken, See, I have given into thine hand Jericho. But it wasn't a call to attack. No siege towers, no battering rams, no catapults or ladders. Instead, he commanded, a walk. The men of war, seasoned, scarred, and anxious, or told to march, but not to shout, not to strike, not to even speak, only to walk, and before them 7 priests would go, each holding a ram's horn, each bearing a sound that had not yet been heard. At the center, once again, was the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God. It would not be a weapon made of iron or wood that tore Jericho's walls. It would be obedience, measured, quiet, steady. So Joshua gave the order. That day, the people of Jericho watched from their walls with confusion and suspicion. They had heard of Israel, of the God who split seas and crushed kings. But they saw no weapons, no arrows drawn, just a line of priests and soldiers, circling like shadows in the dust. Once around the city, no words, no chants, only footsteps and the low hum of wind across the valley. Then they left, back to camp. No battle, no explanation. Day 1 was complete, and it would happen again, and again, and again. 6 days, 6 silent marches, no cracks in the wall, no sign of victory, just the same sacred pattern. But this was not foolishness. It was faith in motion, and each step was a declaration. We do not trust in numbers, in swords, or in the strength of men. We trust in the word of the Lord.
And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. And ye shall compass the city, all the men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of rams, horns. And the 7th day they shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets.
The 7th sunrise broke with fire in the sky. The camp stirred before the light touched the hills, and every man knew this day would not be like the last. The same command echoed across the ranks. March, silently, faithfully. But this time, not once, 7 times. The priests gripped their horns. The warriors adjusted their straps. And Joshua stood with eyes fixed not on Jericho's walls, but on the throne of heaven. Around and around they went. First time, the people of Jericho scoffed. They leaned on their battlements and mocked the parade below. Some laughed. Some shouted insults. Some grew nervous. Second time, the laughter faded. There was something in the silence, something weighty, something unshakable. Third, fourth, 5th time, dust swirled beneath the feet of Israel. Sweat soaked their garments, but no one broke rank. No one spoke a word. 6th time, the tension rose like smoke. The people on the walls could feel it, though they couldn't name it. 7th time, the moment had come. The priests lifted their trumpets. Joshua raised his hand, and the silence that had hung heavy for 7 long days, was shattered. Shout, he cried, for the Lord hath given you the city. The trumpets roared. The people cried out, a sound not of fear, but of faith. A roar that reached beyond the stone, beyond the flesh, a shout that shook the heavens. And then the ground trembled. A groan rolled through the valley. Stone cracked. Dust erupted. The mighty walls of Jericho collapsed. They did not crumble. They fell flat, as if pushed by an invisible hand, as if obedience itself had become a weapon. The city was exposed. The path was open. The Lord had done what no sword could, and Israel rushed forward, not as invaders, but as instruments of divine justice.
And it came to pass on the 7th day, that they rose early about the dawning of the day, and compassed the city after the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. So the people shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets, and the wall fell down flat.
The walls had fallen. The city was in ruin. Smoke curled from shattered homes. Cries echoed in the distance, the sound of a kingdom broken by divine judgment. But amid the rubble, there was one house still standing. Its foundation had trembled. Its walls had shaken. But it had not fallen. It was the house of Rahab, a woman the world called a harlot, but heaven had called chosen. Before the conquest, 2 spies had crept into Jericho. They had hidden in her home, above the city gates. She had risked her life to protect them. She had lied to her own people, not out of deception, but out of faith. I know, she had whispered to them, that the Lord hath given you the land. And she asked for one thing, spare me and my family when the Lord gives you the city. The spies had given her a sign, a scarlet cord tied in her window, a thread of blood-red hope. And now, with fire around her, with stones collapsing and soldiers rushing through the streets, that scarlet cord still fluttered in the wind. Joshua remembered. He turned to the spies who owed her their lives. Go, he said, bring her out, as you swore. And through the chaos, they ran. They entered the house untouched by flame. And there she stood, Rahab, her eyes full of fear, her arms around her family, clutching the only promise that mattered. They led her out, not as a prisoner, not as a traitor, but as a daughter delivered by faith. The woman who once lived in the wall now walked in the covenant. She and her family were brought to the edge of the Israelite camp, and though they had been strangers, Gentiles, and outcasts, they were alive, they were safe, they were remembered. Rahab, the harlot of Jericho, would become the ancestor of kings, of David, and of the Messiah himself, because when the walls fell, her faith stood firm.
And Joshua said unto the 2 men that had spied out the country, Go into the harlot's house, and bring out thence the woman, and all that she hath, as to swear unto her. And the young men that were spies went in, and brought out Rahab, and her father, and her mother, and her brethren. And they brought out all her kindred, and left them without the camp of Israel.
The battle was over. The cries had faded. The walls lay in ruin. And the people of God stood within a city they did not build, a land they had never before touched. But this was no celebration. This was consecration. Joshua's orders were clear. Burn the city, leave nothing behind, but gather all that is holy and dedicate it to the Lord. And so it was done. Flames rose into the sky. Wooden gates crackled. Homes collapsed into ash. Smoke climbed like incense, darkening the horizon. There would be no spoils of war, no treasure hoarded, no victory parade. This was not conquest for glory. It was obedience in purity. The gold, silver, and vessels of value were gathered, not for men, but for the Lord's treasury. It was a sacred offering, the firstfruits of the promised land, a reminder that victory belonged not to Israel's strength, but to the Lord's command. As the fire raged, Joshua stood before the people and spoke with prophetic weight. Cursed be the man who rebuilds this city. Jericho was not to rise again. Its fall was not just tactical, it was theological. It stood as a monument to God's justice. and a warning to all who would defy him. Ashes drifted in the wind. What had once been mighty had been brought low. What had once defied heaven now smoldered in silence. But amid the destruction, the covenant stood stronger than ever. The people had obeyed. The ark still stood at the center. The promise of God marched forward, and Jericho, though fallen, would never be forgotten.
And they burnt the city with fire, and all that was therein, only the silver, and the gold, and the vessels of brass and of iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, Cursed be the man before the Lord, that riseth up and buildeth this city Jericho.
The fires of Jericho eventually died. The stones cooled. The dust settled. But the impact of that day would never fade. Joshua stood not as a warrior bathed in conquest, but as a servant of the living God, shaped by obedience and marked by presence. The people of Canaan trembled, not because of Israel's might, but because the God of heaven walked among them. Word spread across the lands. Villages whispered of a people who marched without speaking, of walls that fell without a single strike, of a God whose voice could shake the ground. But behind the awe was something deeper, a testimony. The fall of Jericho was not just the collapse of stone. It was the unveiling of heaven's authority. It told every nation that God fights for his people, that faith, not force, moves the hand of the Almighty, that obedience, even when it seems foolish, unleashes power no empire can resist. Rahab's scarlet cord still hung in memory, a symbol of mercy in the midst of judgment, a whisper of the gospel yet to come. And Joshua, once the servant of Moses, was now the leader of a nation baptized in promise with the weight of destiny ahead. The journey was far from over. Greater battles still awaited, but Jericho had set the tone, not by strength, not by numbers, not by noise, but by obedience. The city was gone. The curse would stand, but the legacy would live on forever.
So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was noised throughout all the country.